thank you for engaging with the webinar about the Education Inspection Framework and preparing for an Ofsted inspection. We had a really good response from people in terms of the number of people who viewed the webinar, and a number of people had a couple of questions around the webinar after watching it. So the idea of this very brief webinar is as a follow-up in order just to respond to some of those questions. So I'm just got a couple of slides for you to have a look at as I'm answering the questions. So the first question that was asked was, how long will Ofsted spend interviewing the SENCO? And the answer to this is that there isn't a set amount of time that Ofsted will spend with the SENCO, and it's really going to depend on what inspectors have decided that their focus is going to be in terms of the inspection, and anything that they decide they want to follow up after they've looked at other aspects of evidence. So the discussions that Ofsted have with school leaders and with curriculum leaders only really form one part of the inspection evidence. So as you can see here, this is a list of the whole range of evidence that Ofsted is going to be using over the course of an inspection. So as well as those discussions with leaders and governors, clearly they'll be spending a lot of time talking to pupils. They may choose specifically to speak to pupils who have special educational needs and disabilities. They will ask them about their learning, they'll ask them about their school experiences, they'll ask them about whether they enjoy school, whether they get support if they struggle with their learning. They'll ask them about safety, well-being, bullying. So lots of questions directly to the pupils. One of the main ways that Ofsted will gather the evidence for an inspection is through the deep dives that they're now doing as part of this new framework. So the idea of the deep dive is that it's a very focused, in-depth evidence trail really around particular areas or particular subjects and curriculum areas. And as part of those deep dives, what they will be doing is visiting lessons, and those visits that they do to lessons will be joint with other leaders. So it might be that the inspector decides that he or she would like to do a joint lesson observation or learning walk with the SENCO. And those learning walks will be very much focused on how effectively the school is developing and implementing an ambitious curriculum for pupils with SEND. As part of the deep dives, they'll also carry out work scrutinies, and particularly in primary schools, they'll also listen to pupils read. And then, of course, they will get feedback from parents. So often as part of a Section 5 inspection, SENCOs tend to be interviewed on the second day of the inspection. So it might be that whatever inspectors have seen on the first day when they've been doing some of the deep dives, when they've been talking to pupils, they might have specific things that they want to follow up at that point with the SENCO. So the length of that discussion, of that interview, will very much depend on what they've already seen and what else they want to know really. And I think the whole idea of Ofsted using this range of evidence is that they want to look for, if you like, connectedness. So they'll be asking the question, for example, of the head teacher about how the school ensures there is an ambitious curriculum for pupils with SEND. They might ask that to the same question to subject leaders, they might ask it of the SENCO, they might ask it of class teachers. And what Ofsted really want to know is, has everybody got the same message? And then is that something that they're actually seeing in practice, in implementation, when they're going into lessons? Question number 2 was around data. So the question was, do Ofsted wish to see a range of examples of evidence, or is it just data? You'll notice from that list that I've put there that there isn't any data mentioned. That's because that's not something that Ofsted really take a great deal of notice of anymore. They potentially might look at the headlines from your analysed school performance. They've still got access to that. But in terms of any internal data, because of the inconsistencies and because of the fact that data can really show anything that we want it to show, it's not seen as necessarily a reliable source of evidence. Therefore, they won't necessarily ask for to see any specific hard data, if you like. It's very much the inspection process is very much about getting, if you like, first-hand evidence from the inspection itself. There's another question around what evidence will they be looking for to support policies. And well, I suppose the answer to this really is everything that I've just shown you on the last slide. Yes, Ofsted will start by checking compliance. So from an SEN perspective, they'll check to see on your website that you've got a policy, your SEN information report, the accessibility plan, and also your policy for supporting pupils with medical conditions, but they won't necessarily be interested in the content of the policy itself. Actually, what they're interested in is seeing the implementation of the policy in practice. So whatever it says in your policy, you want to make sure that that's actually happening in the classrooms and that they're going to see that when they go around the school. So, for example, if you've got as part of your policy or your SEN information report that pupils have 3 individual support plans a year and that those are used by class teachers in order to support planning, then that's what they're actually going to want to see when they go into classrooms. And they may ask those sorts of questions of teachers as well. The last question was around, do Ofsted require case studies? The quick answer to this is no, definitely not. They do not require case studies. However, what I would say is that it's important that you or other relevant members of staff can talk confidently about particular groups of pupils, and also, if necessary, have information to hand if inspectors want to maybe dig a little bit deeper about particular groups of pupils. And I've put a list there of the groups of pupils that Ofsted are likely or most likely to sort of focus in on. So that obviously, as we're talking about SEND, that includes pupils with SEND, but also some of those other potentially vulnerable groups of children, including those eligible for pupil premium and those for whom referrals have been made to the local authority, for example, because there needs to be social services involvement. So from an SEN perspective, what I would say is to make sure as a SENCO that you have got to hand any information that you might want to use to back up any questions that Ofsted might have. There are still schools that do case studies. If you choose to do that, that's entirely up to you. Some SENCOs have said that they feel doing case studies is helpful because it sort of helps them to prepare for that conversation, should that conversation arise. The only problem is that you might do case studies on particular children. Ofsted might ask you for information on other children that you haven't done case studies on. So rather than necessarily preparing something specifically, it's better, as I say, if you make sure in terms of your systems and processes that you've got everything there to hand if needs be, and that you can confidently talk about particular groups of children and the provision you've put in place and the impact that that's had, if Ofsted asks those questions. Okay, so those were the only questions really that arose from people who watched the original webinar. Hope those responses were useful. If anybody does have any further questions after watching this follow-up webinar, please do feel free to contact me directly, and my details are there. Thank you very much.